There are four things I want to talk about with regard to the musical staff. We're just going to do a quick overview here. This is the musical staff, and the staff is composed of lines that you can see here. Those are lines, and then spaces. And these lines and spaces help us to identify the note names. So for instance, this note head here is positioned over line E. And so that note is an E note. This space here is space F. And so you can see how this note head is positioned on that space F. And so we identify that as an F note. And so that's what the musical staff does. It helps identify the note heads so that we can identify those notes on our instrument. And then we have the time signature, or what some call the meter signature, and then the musical clef. And in this case, this is called the G clef. So those are the four things that we talked about. We have lines and spaces for note identification. We have the time signature for rhythm. And then we're going to talk about the G clef in this next segment. You probably noticed this symbol first when you're looking at a piece of sheet music. It's called the clef. And in this case, we call it the G clef. Some people call it the treble clef. But the main reason we call it a G clef is because the center of this circle here designates a G note. So you notice that this circle is hovering over this line right here. And that tells us that this second line is a G note. So that's what we're going to be dealing with in guitar music. Now sometimes you may see this circle positioned over the first line. And in that case, this first line would no longer be an E, it would then be designated as a G note. You may find this clef hovering over this line here, and in that case, this line becomes the G. So anywhere you put the center of this clef, that designates that line as a G note. Now there are other types of clefs, and throughout the Dark Ages and the Renaissance, we had all sorts of weird symbols that would designate different note names for these lines. Bass players use a bass clef. It's a totally different symbol, but the center of that symbol would designate one of these lines as an F note. And we have alto and tenor clefs. Those all identify certain lines as certain notes. But as guitar players, we're going to be using this G clef or this treble clef. That's really all we have to know for right now. Now that we know what the treble clef or the G clef is, we can begin identifying notes on the musical staff. Notice that this treble clef or this G clef is hovering over the second line, which means that this line is a G note. And you can see that right here. This note here, this quarter note, is positioned on the G line, and therefore it is a G note. So if this is G, then that means the next letter of the alphabet in music, we don't go to H, we go to A. And that means that this space is an A note. And after A comes B. That means the third line is a B note. And you just run up the alphabet from B to C to D to E. And we're going to finish here on F. Now we can go higher. We go and get into what we call ledger lines. But we'll cover those later on. And then if we're on G and we go below a G, we know the first letter below a G is an F. So this space here is an F. And if we go underneath that F, we have the first line, which is an E. So starting on this first line, we're just going to run alphabetically until we get to the top line. If you do that, you run through the alphabet E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. And those notes are like that because of this G clef. This G clef is designating that second line as a G. And if we know that and our knowledge of theory and how the musical alphabet works, we can identify all the other notes. Now to be a good sight reader, we're going to have to be able to identify these lines and spaces quickly. And the best way to do this is to learn how to spell the alphabet in thirds. And so to do that, we're going to separate the lines from the spaces. I'll show you how that works. I want you to memorize two acronyms. When we're finding notes on the spaces, I want you to memorize FACE for space. So for example, if you're trying to find an E note here, instead of going through the alphabet E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, that took too long. If you can just memorize FACE for space, all you would have to do is go F-A-C-E, there's an E. Boom, you got it. So it's much quicker to memorize the spaces using the acronym FACE. Now for the lines, I want you to memorize this. Every good boy does fine for the line. And so if we're trying to find this note, for instance, instead of going E, F, G, A, B, C, D. Oh, okay, I found a D, but that took too long. Just memorize. Every good boy does. That's the D note. So what we're doing there is we're memorizing the alphabet in thirds. Notice from F to A, that's 3 letters. From A to C is 3 letters. From C to E, that's 3 letters. It's much quicker to think of it that way. From E to G is 3 letters. From G to B is 3 letters, and so on. So by memorizing the alphabet in thirds with those two acronyms, you can find notes much, much quicker. It's going to help you in the reading process. So once again, it's every good boy does fine for the lines, and F-A-C-E for the spaces. So let's do a quick quiz here. I'm going to point to a note and click on it like this, and then you're going to identify it. So I'm going to do this for about a minute or so that you can develop your skills in note identification. So let's get started. What note is this line here? And here. And here. I'm just going to keep doing this. And finally, this note right there. And it would be a good idea for you to take that quiz every day until you get fast enough to identify those notes. And the fourth component of the musical staff we've already covered in levels. If you look up at level 18, we talk about the time signature. And so this is going to help us understand rhythm as it relates to the musical staff. And in this case, we are in 4/4 time signature. And you already know that the top number tells us the number of counts in each measure. By now, you should know what a measure is. It's a container of counts. And you know that in 4/4 time signature, that measure can contain up to 4 counts. On the musical staff, a measure is represented by these vertical lines here. So from this point to this point is a measure. And a measure is just a container of counts. When we are in 4/4 time signature, what we've learned in levels so far is what the top number means. And that top number means that each measure contains 4 counts. And so if I were to count out this measure here, I would go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now some measures will only have 3 counts. And in that case, we would count to 3. And the math would add up with respect to the notes. But we'll get into that as we approach those exercises. For now, all you need to know is that the top number tells us that each of these measures, and you know what a measure looks like now on the staff, each of those measures would get 4 counts.